The Last Stop Motel. The neon sign for the Last Stop Motel flickered with a dying hum, casting a rhythmic, sickly blue light over the cracked asphalt. It was 2 a.m. in a corner of Nebraska that God had seemingly forgotten, where the wind didn't just blow, it whispered secrets you didn't want to hear. The check-in. Elias was exhausted. His grip on the steering wheel had turned his knuckles white after 12 hours of driving through a seamless curtain of rain. When the motel appeared through the deluge, it looked less like a sanctuary and more like a tombstone. The lobby smelled of stale menthol and damp carpet. Behind the plexiglass sat a man whose skin looked like crumpled parchment. He didn't look up from his ledger. "Room 14, the man rasped, sliding a heavy brass key across the counter. "End of the row. Don't mind the pipes. They scream when it rains." Elias didn't argue. He took the key, parked his car right in front of the peeling door of room 14, and collapsed onto the bed without even taking off his boots. He woke up 3 hours later to a sound that wasn't the rain. It was a rhythmic, metallic scrit, scrit, scrit. It sounded like someone was dragging a dull blade across the exterior wood of the room. Elias sat up, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at the gap beneath the door. The light from the parking lot was partially blocked. 2 shadows, the tips of heavy boots, were standing right outside. "Hello?" Elias called out, his voice cracking. The shadows didn't move. The scratching stopped. Then a voice, soft as a razor blade across silk, drifted through the wood. "You have a beautiful car, Elias. It's a shame you won't be needing the keys anymore." Panic, cold and sharp, flooded Elias's chest. How did the stranger know his name? He scrambled for his phone on the nightstand, but the screen remained black. The cord had been neatly severed, the copper wires splayed out like a dead jellyfish. He backed away toward the bathroom, eyes fixed on the door. That's when he felt it. The floorboards were wet. He looked down. A dark, viscous liquid was seeping from under the bathroom door. It wasn't rain. It was thick, deep crimson, and it carried the iron tang of fresh blood. He didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at him to run through the front door, but the shadow outside was still there, waiting. With trembling hands, Elias pushed the bathroom door open. The bathtub was full, but not with water. Inside lay the night clerk, his throat opened like a second mouth, his eyes staring at the ceiling in a permanent expression of shock. Resting on the clerk's chest was Elias's wallet. It had been emptied. A note was pinned to the clerk's shirt with a sewing needle. "Occupied. Checkout time is forever." A heavy thud echoed from the front door. The killer wasn't picking the lock anymore. He was using a shoulder. Thump, thump. The wood began to splinter. Elias looked at the tiny, high window in the bathroom. It was his only chance. He climbed onto the toilet, kicking the porcelain lid as he scrambled upward. He shattered the glass with his elbow, ignoring the shards slicing into his skin. As he pulled himself through the narrow frame, the front door to the room finally gave way with a sickening crack. Elias tumbled into the mud behind the motel, gasping for air. He didn't look back until he reached the tree line. When he finally turned, he saw a tall, thin figure standing in the window of room 14. The figure wasn't rushing. He was simply standing there, holding a long, curved hunting knife that caught the blue flash of the neon sign. The killer raised a hand, not to wave, but to point. He wasn't pointing at Elias. He was pointing at the car keys Elias had left sitting on the nightstand. Elias realized with a jolt of pure terror that he was 3 miles from the nearest town, on foot, in the dark, and the man with the knife now had the keys to a vehicle. The engine of Elias's own car roared to life, the headlights cutting through the woods like the eyes of a predator. The Last Stop Motel lived up to its name. As the car began to slowly roll off the asphalt and toward the tree line, Elias started to run. But in the dark of the Nebraska plains, there is nowhere to hide from a hunter who has all the time in the world. Would you like me to write a sequel where Elias tries to survive the night in the woods, or perhaps a different horror story set in a city? The headlights of Elias's own sedan cut through the tall grass like twin scythes. He didn't think, he just ran. The mud pulled at his boots, trying to swallow his feet with every step, but the adrenaline overrode the exhaustion that had plagued him only an hour before. To his left was the open road, a death trap. To his right was an endless sea of winter corn, the stalks dried and brittle, standing like a million skeletal sentinels. Elias dived into the rows. The sound was deafening. Every movement he made caused the dry husks to snap and rustle, broadcasting his position to the entire county. Behind him, he heard the car door creak open, then the heavy thud of it closing. The engine stayed running, the high beams illuminating the edge of the field, turning the corn into a wall of long, jagged shadows. Then the music started. From the car's speakers, a distorted, warped version of a 1950s love song began to blare. The killer wasn't just hunting, he was choreographing. Elias crawled on his hands and knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He tried to stay quiet, but the killer began to speak again, his voice amplified by the quiet of the plains. "You know, Elias, the clerk told me you were headed to Denver, moving for a job, starting over. It's a beautiful thing, a fresh start. But the problem with fresh starts is that they leave such a clean trail." The sound of footsteps entered the cornfield. They weren't hurried, they were rhythmic. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Elias found a small irrigation ditch, half filled with freezing, stagnant water. He slid into it, pressing his face against the cold mud, praying the shadows would fold over him. He watched through the stalks. A pair of heavy work boots stopped just 3 feet from his head. The killer stood there, dragging the tip of his hunting knife against a dry cornstalk, making a high-pitched, screeching sound that set Elias's teeth on edge. "I can smell the sweat, Elias. It smells like copper and cowardice." The killer lunged suddenly, driving the knife deep into the earth, exactly where Elias's hand had been seconds before. Elias let out a choked yelp and scrambled backward, abandoning his hiding spot. He broke out of the corn and saw a looming shape against the moonlight. An abandoned grain silo, its rusted tin roof partially collapsed. It was a fortress or a coffin, he didn't have time to decide. He sprinted for the ladder, his fingers slick with blood and mud. He climbed, the rusted metal groaning under his weight. Halfway up, a hand gripped his ankle. Elias screamed, kicking down with all his might. His boot connected with something hard, the killer's face. There was a sickening crunch, and the grip loosened. Elias scrambled into the loft of the silo, his heart hammering so hard he thought his ribs might snap. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of fermented grain and decay. He looked for a weapon and found a heavy, rusted iron wrench. He backed into the darkest corner, the wrench raised, his eyes fixed on the trapdoor. Silence fell over the silo. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. No footsteps, no breathing. Just the wind whistling through the holes in the tin roof. "I know you're up there," the killer whispered. The voice didn't come from the ladder. Elias spun around. The killer was already in the loft. He hadn't used the ladder. He had climbed the exterior piping like a spider. He stood in the shadows, his face obscured, but his eyes reflected the moonlight. Cold, empty, and devoid of any humanity. "You're a fighter," the man said, wiping blood from his broken nose with the back of his hand. "I like that. It makes the ending mean more." The killer moved with terrifying speed. Elias swung the wrench, but the man dodged it with a fluid, practiced motion. The knife flashed, slicing a shallow red line across Elias's chest. Elias swung again, catching the killer's shoulder, but the man didn't even flinch. It was as if he didn't feel pain. They grappled, tumbling across the rotted floorboards. The wood gave way. Both men plummeted 20 feet down into the empty base of the silo. Elias landed on a pile of old burlap sacks, the air driven from his lungs. The killer landed hard on the concrete perimeter. Elias struggled to stand, his vision swimming. He saw the killer twitching on the ground, the knife lying a few feet away. This was it. He didn't stay to finish it. He didn't check for a pulse. Elias scrambled out through a gap in the rusted siding and ran back toward the road. He reached his car. The engine was still idling, the driver's door wide open. He jumped in, slammed it into gear, and floored it. He didn't stop until he saw the lights of a 24-hour police station 50 miles away. As the sun began to bleed over the horizon, Elias sat in the back of an ambulance, a blanket draped over his shaking shoulders. A detective walked over, holding a plastic evidence bag. "We checked the motel," the detective said, his face grim. "Found the clerk, found the blood in room 14, but we checked the silo you described." Elias looked up, his eyes wide. "Did you find him? Is he dead?" The detective shook his head slowly. "We found the blood on the concrete, quite a lot of it, but the silo was empty, no body." He handed Elias the evidence bag. Inside was a small Polaroid photo the police had found tucked into the sun visor of Elias's car. It was a photo taken from the back seat of the car through the rearview mirror. It showed Elias driving, his face pale and terrified, taken just minutes after he had escaped the silo. On the back, written in fresh, smeary ink, were 3 words: "See you soon."